out there were available to make the Earth better and more livable. Perhaps the opportunity to explore was there.
The road to space isn't paved with technology and rockets alone. It's built on the dream.
Sorry, y'all. I'm having technical difficulty. Give me a second.
Rockets alone. It's built on the dreams, risk, and relentless spirit of those who dare look up and say, "We belong there." For over 30 years, the Space Frontier Foundation has been a home for these visionary, radical, action-oriented individuals. Hear their stories, learn how space was shaped, and revel in the revolution of commercial space pioneers.
Welcome once again to Commercial Space Pioneers, joined today by the one and only Walt Anderson. Walt, thanks for joining us and for sharing some of your personal journeys as it relates to creating this commercial space world that we have today.
Thank you.
So, Walt, I know you have been absolutely instrumental in multiple companies, very instrumental in a lot of nonprofits, the Space Frontier Foundation and others. We're going to talk about those things, but I want to understand, first of all, what did space mean to you when you were growing up that led to you wanting to put such time and energy and resources into this domain?
Well, I realized at some point that space was a frontier, and that the resources out there were available to make the Earth better and more livable. Perhaps the opportunity to explore was there, all that opportunity, but really space was a resource for mankind. To have a certain percentage of people living off the planet made sense, to provide a sort of reserve human genome in case there was some planet-wide disaster, to provide the opportunity to explore and grow and look at different environments for humans to live in. So
you have the resource framework. Do you have any idea when that, because it seems like not everyone thinks of space as a place of resource, right? Do you have any idea when that formed, or has that always been like?
Maybe as long as I can remember, like maybe when I was 12, 13 years old and I started getting into it, I started seeing space as a resource. I mean, the sun shines 24 hours a day up there.
When you were young, way back, do you have any idea what early exposure to the space world you got from your formative years?
Well, I remember when I was 5, 6 years old having a book on astronomy, and started sort of being interested in the basic, the planets and the rotation, real basic stuff. And I had one of my uncles for Honeywell Corporation doing stuff for NASA, so he sometimes talked about stuff. But basically, it's just my own interest in science and technology and understanding the universe a little more. And
there's some in the industry who have been obsessed since they were walking. You don't sound like you were space obsessed at an early age. You were aware and interested, but not necessarily like consumed by it.
No, I was fascinated by it, and as time went on, I realized that using the space resource, getting humans out into space, living in habitats in space was going to be an important step for the future evolution of mankind. And that idea evolved over time, but eventually it became a certainty that this was absolutely necessary for the future of mankind and for human evolution to be done. That's my opinion, but I began to believe that probably by the time I was 12, 13 years old. I had that convinced and didn't realize there were a lot of other people out there just as convinced of the same thing until quite a lot later when I, around the same time, early 80s, I met both Todd Hawley at ISU, and I saw a small article and I contacted them and talked to Todd Hawley, who was the visionary behind ISU, and became one of the founders of ISU, one of the 14 founders of the International Space University. Around the same time, I met Rick Tumlinson, who was starting the Space Frontier Foundation, and he introduced me to Gerald O'Neill at SSI. So I got to kind of instantly meet all these people who had the same similar opinion to me, that I thought I was one of the few crazy people in the world who believed that. And that happened almost in the same 1 year time frame, 1987.
What was life like before this catastrophic introduction to all of these other people?
I was running a telephone company called Mid-Atlantic Telecom, which provided telecom internet and telecom services to companies in the 7 Mid-Atlantic states, about 30% of the U.S. population. So we had, sophisticated telecom network. We had lower prices and better quality than AT&T, and we were competing in that market. So I had a little company. It was interesting. I enjoyed doing that.
Were you, pursuing space things at that point? Like, did you study space topics in college, or like where is it in the kind of hobby interest?
No, I mean, I was pretty much a self-studying person, so I understood the space propulsion. So, I understood the basics of rocket science and satellite, particularly satellite, because I was in the telecom business, and understood the basic ideas, theoretical and technical ideas that people operating in space and rockets. And I wasn't involved in any activities related to space at that time.
But you were, and I want to pick that. You're like, oh yeah, I was familiar with satellites and communication, and that's an important piece. So you were already using space resource to a certain degree in your
a very small percentage of our network was satellite services. Most of it was terrestrial, but maybe 5% of our traffic was going over satellites.
There are still people today that they're not conscious of how space impacts their lives. And so you were using space and aware of it, and it was part of a business. And then you get this this chance to meet some of the others. So were you the kind of guy that would be bringing up space conversations around the coffee pot or the water cooler and be like, oh my God, did you hear about this? Or was this just like a personal interest that?
No, I would sometimes talk about the idea of mankind's, this evolutionary idea that not all your eggs in one basket idea of human beings, wondering how many human DNA sets needed to be off the planet to be safe. They're human beings to protect their genetic heritage in case the Earth was destroyed in a catastrophic event or something.
And this is, by my calculation, a while ago. And we've made some progress, but not solved all of those things. All right, so tell us a little bit about ISU, what that is, and how you came to be involved in it.
Okay. Well, International Space University was actually formed, I guess, 1987. It had its first summer program in 1988. I heard about it right after it had been formed by the visionary Todd Hawley, and I contacted him and was kind of excited about it, and got involved as both an advisor, board member. I provided some critical funding at an early stage to keep them going when they needed that, and they got over that hump and were able to survive on their own. But it was just seemed pretty cool. The multidisciplinary program of ISU, it would bring rather than just bring space scientists or rocket scientists, they had all the different disciplines, legal, medicine, philosophy, art. All these people who were interested in space would come together and look at how to build theoretical space program, how to do specific things in space, combining all these skill sets, which were all needed to make a successful space program. So the rocket scientists probably didn't leave ISU having learned a whole lot more about rocket science, but they certainly understood how their technology needed to be integrated with other disciplines to make a successful program. Pretty valuable. We had some amazing people there, like the designers of the Chinese Long March rockets came there as students to ISU. Plus, it was multicultural. So you had most years 20 to 30 different people from different countries. So you had a lot of languages. It was mostly in English, but you had to deal with a lot of different cultural issues. And it was pretty exciting for the first few years in particular, because it was something completely new.
Obviously, funding and support is critical. Like none of this stuff, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. What was it, if you can, what was it about that was like, yeah, this is a cause worth putting capital to, thank you. And how did you come to make that decision that was a thing to?
Well, the driving thing was, of course, it was a great idea, but I mean, the multidiscipline, multicultural really impressed me. It really was I thought that was really the right way to go, since Earth is a tiny planet in space and we're all here on this place. So the idea that we all would participate and it would be open to other cultures rather than just an American program, which most Americans thought NASA is the only company doing things in space. I thought that was pretty impressive. It turned out to work out very, very well. It actually was very successful to have the multidisciplinary, multicultural, and it's still going on. It's one of the few things I've done that's still doing what it was set up to do in the same way it was set up successfully. Most of the companies I've had have been sold off and ruined or screwed up or out of business. But this thing, from the first program in 1988 that was held at MIT till the current summer programs and the year-long graduate program held in Strasbourg, France, is still doing exactly that thing in mostly the same way successfully.
Yeah, there's not that many organizations that have that longevity. So ISU, you're supporting ISU. What was it about the Space Frontier Foundation? Were you part of National Space Society, or did you?
No, I never been part of the National Space Society. They were too much U.S. government ass kissing for me. They really weren't very open to the international side. So I guess I was introduced, I think maybe Todd Hawley introduced me to Rick Tumlinson, and who was one of the founders of Space Frontier Foundation. And I liked Rick immediately. We liked each other, so we became friends. But he was sitting there in the New York Manhattan Harbor on the Enterprise, old Enterprise aircraft carrier, with a little office down in the bowels of the ship where he'd gotten free office space to start Space Frontier Foundation. So again, I thought it was a great idea to bring people together. Space Frontier Foundation always was attracted a lot of innovative, crazy people who wanted to do things differently and creatively. Many of the companies that are now successful in space started out with the people coming to Space Frontier, including, I hate to say the name, Elon Musk. He attended a number of years there, and before he knew what he wanted to do in space. And a number of other people who've created successful space enterprises were part of that enterprise, Space Frontier Foundation, before they went on to do things, because it was a great incubator to see what other people were doing and to associate with people who had the same vision.
So besides it being a great idea and a compelling Rick Tumlinson, you were supporting the organization, some financial support perhaps. What else were you getting from the participation? It was a learning experience for me. I was doing this business, which was a fairly, telecom business. We had customers. It was interesting, but it wasn't the most I could do, the most interesting thing in the world I could do. But development of space seemed like something that was more difficult, that was actually challenging and difficult, but worth doing. And so much more interesting, meeting all the people involved, looking at the future possibilities of what might be done. And
Yeah, it was exciting.
I know the insider outsider dynamic doesn't fit. I'm going to use that as through this time you're supporting. Do you consider yourself a space insider, or are you still like an outside supporter? Other people are the insiders, and you're just.
I don't know. I guess I'm kind of an insider. I mean, I was on the board of both ISU and Space Frontier. Okay. I was involved in trying to support a number of space organizations, all the way from AMROC to Rotary Rocket to a number of other various things, like trying to do missions to the moon and other things. So I think I'm pretty much on the inside of things.
I mean, now, absolutely. But like back then,
I think I quickly tried to get inside. Okay. It was so interesting. I wanted to be in the middle. That's why I was accepted a board position in both organizations. I also was very involved with the management of ISU. I mean, it was a small entrepreneurial organization, and I was running another small entrepreneurial organization. So I understood a lot about the dynamics of how to help ISU, not just financially, but also how to deal with some of the issues that come up in an organization of that size. And Todd and I were buddies, so we worked together well, and we helped each other.
It sounds like the interpersonal relationships were essential in these like putting these things together. You're finding people that share common vision and are willing to put their shoulder to the wheel, metaphorically speaking, right?
Yeah. I mean, these people were really, I mean, some of these people dedicated their life. Todd Hawley and Rick dedicated their life to this cause.
Yeah.
More so than me. I was, and I thought I was an enthusiast, but they, yeah.
So we're now into early 90s. Like, are you still running the telecom, or?
Yeah, I've in 1993, I sold that company and started another company in Europe called Esprit Telecom, doing very much the same thing, but now we're operating across international, we're operating in 12 European countries and offices all over Europe, and we're challenging the largest companies in the world, telecom companies in the world, like Telefonica is the largest company in Spain, and British Telecom, France Telecom, and we're actually competing head to head with these giant companies and kicking their ass.
As you're doing that, how is your view, your understanding? So you've got the vision about our future, humanity's species future in space. How are events in the space world supporting or challenging that vision as you're coming through this time?
Well, throughout all this time, the organizations, International Space University got support from national space agencies around the world. ESA, NASA, and the Space Frontier Foundation obviously had interconnection and communication with these organizations, but there was a certain frustration. I always believe in the free market and competition, and certainly in the US, there was no such thing in the space industry back in the 90s. There was a couple preferred vendors, cost plus contractors, the same people that make weapons, and they were the preferred vendors, and they were the ones who were going to supposedly build all the space stuff for the US government. They weren't very innovative. They were high cost. And so one of Space Frontier's goals all along was to promote competitive space, what's now called new space. And we've really worked hard to promote that and got a lot of our companies involved. Were always ended up with resistance. If they didn't join NASA and somehow become a NASA contractor and get inside NASA, NASA killed them, tried to kill them and destroy them. And it went on like that for a very long time. In Europe, there wasn't as much entrepreneurial space activity. ESA was actually relatively open to that compared to NASA, but they didn't have a lot of people in Europe promoting private space at that time.
Yeah. Now, so that's a critical observation about the environment, because, and not everyone, again, our audience here, some of this is going to be people that know these stories already, but then some of this is also people that are newer to the industry. The fact is that commercial launch went to Europe for a long period of time. it's challenging sometimes to try and figure out how did the U.S., which had a leading position, lose it.
Well, it's simple because it was all NASA. NASA was not going to allow another launch company to survive back in the 90s, whereas Europe was willing to have some very large companies go into the market and compete. And they did have some very successful technology at that time, Ariane and other organizations that supported them. So Europe was more open to the creativity of the private market, even though it was large contractors, than NASA. NASA had to have it invented there, built there by their special pet contractors, and that's it.
Do you have a theory on why that was? I mean, why did the world turn into that? Do you have?
I think it has to do with the fact that America at that time was still the great empire of the world, and NASA was their space agency. So a lot of people around the world look to NASA as the space agency in the world. I'd say the average person wouldn't even know NASA existed, or JAXA, the Japanese space agency, or that every other country, India had a space agency, Brazil had a space agency. Everybody looked to NASA. The great empire was going to solve all the problems. They had successfully gone to the moon first, so that was a milestone and a positive milestone. So I don't think people realized that was not the way for ultimately humankind to get to space, that the government-only approach wasn't going to work ultimately.
In the 90s, is that reality is that starting to dawn on people, or like there's a general public people, and then there's,
certainly the Space Frontier Foundation became a lot bigger membership. A lot of people showed up there with ideas they wanted to do, creative ideas, and they were looking for funding and support, and I provided a little bit of that to some people, but it was very difficult to get traction because of this resistance from NASA. But a lot of people tried. A lot of people put in a tremendous amount of effort and creativity, which was sort of stifled and squelched.
So you're not only are you supporting these nonprofit, like these greater good initiatives, you're also putting money, you're investing into space companies or.
Oh yeah, AMROC was the first one started in 1984. George Koopman, private rocket launch, and that was the holy grail at that time, to have alternate rocket launching companies.
Why did you put money into that? I mean, okay, you like him, but like.
Well, it was just the one company that seemed like it had a shot. They were moving forward. They were aggressively trying to do this. Now, George Koopman died in 1989. Company failed, didn't go on. There were other companies that I supported, like rocket launch type enterprises, LunaCorp, which wanted to do a mission to the moon. All of them very entrepreneurial and not using large contractors.
Can I pick at the mindset of the investor at that time a little bit?
As a telecom entrepreneur, I was very successful in building companies. I created two unicorn, $2 billion companies. As a space investor, I was willing to take a higher level of risk with my investment. In other words, I was investing in things that had a lower probability of success, but still I believed it was important enough for the future opportunity, that I would take that risk. So I look like an idiot investing in space, having tried to privatize the Mir or invest in an early rocket company, or going to the moon, private mission to the moon. But we thought, I and others believed those were important things to do. They were high risk, less probable than this telecom stuff I did, which we knew exactly what we were doing and why and what the market was and everything. But it was important. This was an important thing to do, to pursue this longer term goal involving the entire world and everybody on it. That was my motivation at the time.
And I appreciate that, and like the understanding. I do not think at all that you look like an idiot for having invested in these things, because you don't know what's going to work, and if you sit around and wait for things to work, then the opportunities are gone anyway, right? Like, so it makes sense. You weren't thinking, oh well, this is a sure thing. This was, all right, I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to, like, did you have a portfolio? And you're like, okay, well, I can take some, this is my fund money or anything like that? Or like, this is still real money. Like,
Oh yeah, real money. Yes, and
yeah. And not like, there's some people that think investment money is like something that comes out of thin air. It doesn't come out of thin air. It comes out of somebody's pocket. So like, you're putting your money where your mouth is over and over.
well, it's like the joke: if you want to become a millionaire in space, you have to start out as a billionaire.
Okay.
I was taking the money that I received from the corporate entities in telecommunications and the profits that were generated, and investing it into space activities, both the not-for-profits and the small companies that were doing creative things.
So you mentioned a space station in there. Is there another? I want to get to MirCorp, but I don't want to skip too far ahead. Is there another turn of your story in terms of you're investing, you're seeing some traction, you're concerned about resistance? What's the next piece? What's the next turn of your?
Well, we're investing in a number of space startups. LunaCorp, Amrock was early, XCore, Rotary Rocket. A number of launch type companies trying to build launch systems. LunaCorp wanted to use those systems to go to the moon. Now there are over 150 launch companies of various levels of success, but certainly many are successful already. But then the idea of having a private launch company was unusual, and nobody had it yet. A lot of it was because the companies involved were getting sabotaged or damaged in some way by NASA efforts, and a very intentional and well thought out strategy, I think.
Okay, once you get over the initial maybe shock or rage about it, like, what was the next piece of that? Like, were you then asking the foundation or ISU folks to go kick a senator in the shins? Or like,
at ISU, we were interfacing with all these people that would later become officials of NASA and their various space agencies, or would become employees of space-related or technical-related companies in their home countries. So there is a huge body of alumni from ISU that I think came away with a very entrepreneurial spirit, a very open market and free market spirit about space. Certainly in ESA, the people that I meet in ESA that were ISU graduates are very much that way, but also even Indian Space Agency, other agencies all over the world. And that was a positive thing, but it takes a while to change a culture. NASA, there's a lot of people working for NSA and ASA that are supporting private space or had supported private space, but the political people in charge were the ones that made the final decision. So when people were doing cool things, were wanting to do cool things, these NASA guys were like, oh, that's great. That's interesting. How interesting. But they weren't the ones that could pave the road or help them. They didn't have the power to do that. It was the administrator and his cronies and the government that were shutting these things down or harming them or playing games with them. One strategy was to give a small contract to the company, and then they gear up with their employees, and then NASA would pull the rug out from under them, and now they couldn't pay 20 or 30 employees that they had and would go out of business. That was a common trick that NASA played. Yeah.
So how did you get involved with this commercial space station idea, this MirCorp?
Well, Space Frontier Foundation had, and ISU had connections into Russia. This before Russia became what it is today. Russia was becoming more liberalized, an open country, particularly their space field. They opened up to the world, shared what they knew and had done. Now they had a situation where the Mir space station in around 1999, Russia was running into some severe financial problems, and they couldn't afford to pay to keep the Mir station up, or the budget wasn't there to keep the Mir station boosted every 6 to 9 months with a rocket. So they were going to deorbit it. That was the plan. And a number of people heard about it. Again, named Rick Tumlinson was one of the people who promoted this idea to save the Mir. So he started a campaign within Space Frontier Foundation. And the idea was to try to convince the Russians to, hey, find the money, save it. It's a resource. It's never been used for military. It's a peaceful space station. It's a value. It has a value. Well, the Russians came back to him and talked to him. He said, if you want to save it, help us find the money. And Rick said, well, let me go talk to somebody. And I was the one he went to talk to. So we flew over there and met with a bunch of people who were very cynical and very believe it was possible, but we convinced them that we were willing and able to provide funding to save the Mir, and we were, and we did. We funded a private mission to the Mir because it'd been shut down without any people on board for about 9 months or a year. Don't remember exactly. So they went up there to see what the condition was, to do an evaluation or to see what needed to be renovated to bring the Mir into service again.
And this is Russia sends cosmonauts.
Well, actually, Russian cosmonauts who are working for MirCorp privately. We formed a company called MirCorp. My organization and RSC Energia, the Russian company that built and owned the Mir, were partners in MirCorp.
Okay.
And my company provided the funding to support a mission to Mir, which was the first private mission to a private space station with private cosmonauts. So the cosmonauts were contracted to us. They were Russian-trained cosmonauts, but they were private cosmonauts when they went up to the Mir, because the Mir was a private space station at that time. So it's a very unique situation. They were going up there, working for a private company to evaluate the condition of this private asset that we now held the lease on, to see what would take to upgrade and bring it into the current technology. And we discovered that for less than $100 million US, we could fully renovate the Mir and make it a couple generations more modern than the ISS, which was currently being built. Once that became apparent, that was what really caused the asset to get upset.
Oh my God, so many pieces in here. You funded not yourself going on a joyride. Don't mean to disparage, but like, it wasn't, you didn't say, hey, I want to go experience this. You said there is resource, there is opportunity here. I'm going to hire some people to go do this work because they know what they're doing and I don't.
It was very, very tempting to use the resource I had to take that ride. Okay. And I really, really was tempted. But my longer term goals was that to save this asset. And that wouldn't have happened if I'd just gone up there and had my own fun. So I felt I could do that later. I thought, well, I have plenty of opportunity to go to the Mir once we save it. Yeah. That was my view. Wrong. But
that's treating this like a business, high risk, but still it's a business mindset rather than a, activity mindset.
Well, it was also really, again, the future of mankind can be significantly affected by what we do in space. The future health, prosperity, and peace and prosperity on this planet can be affected. And so that was more important than my taking a trip that I really wanted to take. This is early 1999, where we do the mission to Mir with the cosmonauts, and they do an evaluation. They patch a little hole. There's a little leak. They patch it. And Mir is basically sound physical structure. It's like a building that you renovate. You break it down to its basic structure. Then you add, you put back in the electrical and the walls and the heating and cooling and all that. That's what we were going to do for $100 million. Now, at that time, ISS had reached the billion dollar mark, way over budget. And of course, the NASA depended entirely on Russian launch systems to launch certain components because the US didn't have heavy launch systems. So Russia had to launch the bigger components, and that they were partners in the ISS process to launch those heavy bits into ISS that ISS needed, the International Space Station needed.
So take just a minute. I thought the space shuttle was the awesomest, most technologically marvelous thing ever. Like, why couldn't the U.S. launch?
It didn't have the Russia had a heavy lift rocket that could take much larger, heavier pieces than the space shuttle. So the ISS was designed with the assumption that the Russians would launch those, and they did. They kept all their agreements. They launched these bits and made up critical parts of the ISS. Shuttle couldn't have done that. The hold wasn't big enough, and the weight lift capability wasn't big enough.
Okay. Just in case, and again, growing up in a different era, the shuttle was the thing that represented U.S. space access, and it was so much more advanced than what anyone else was doing. But even in its being advanced, it did not mean that it was superior in all measures.
Well, the shuttle never did what it was supposed to do. It was a technical failure. It was supposed to be able to be relaunched every 2 weeks. It turned out to have some serious problems that required months of preparation between launches. So NASA never admitted that. They celebrated its success, but actually the technology and the plan behind the shuttle failed, but they still worked with it. That's what they had, and they continue to work with it and launch every multiple months instead of every 2 weeks, which was what it was designed to do originally. Yeah.
Even before that, you're saying you're the first, you and MirCorp were the ones to bankroll a private space, crewed human space.
Right. We set up MirCorp. MirCorp funded this mission. And what was interesting is a fellow named Jeff Mamber became the president of MirCorp.
Yep.
Jeff came to me and he said, Walt, I got to talk to you. The guys at Russian Mission Control have come to me and they said that I'm the one who has to give the order to launch. I said, why? He said, because it's our space station, not theirs anymore. And I said, well, Jeff, have fun. Give the order, you know. And,
yeah. Go. Yeah. You know, he didn't tell us that one in our conversation. So MirCorp, this sounds phenomenal. You've got a space station that's on orbit. You fixed it up. You have
we didn't fix it up. No, we didn't fix it up.
Okay.
We needed $100 million to do that, and I didn't have $100 million. We went to Barclays Capital in the UK, and KPMG wrote a very sophisticated document in analyzing the situation. And Barclays Capital was about 6 months away from an IPO where they would raise us the $100 million, and they felt absolutely confident that worldwide they could easily raise $100 million for Mir. And we were ready to go forward and renovate the Mir station, and with that $100 million. And as I said, we would have been putting in air handling systems and computers and other things that were significantly more sophisticated than ISS. So we would have ended up with the old Russian Mir station being the most modern station, and ISS being second rate. And that really caused a lot of nervousness and upset on the part of NASA after spending $100 billion on their station.
So as you're living through this, and I know, if you can't tell, I know that there's going to be a dark turn to the story, but before the dark turn, so you've got Mamber running it, you've got significant capital into it. What are you doing day to day? Are you working and supporting MirCorp, or are you still doing?
I'm working. I mean, I'm an executive. I'm chairman, co-chairman, vice chairman, the guy running the Russian company's chairman. I'm supporting Jeff in many hours a day, but I'm still running my telecom operation in Europe, doing my day job, you could say, but still spending a considerable amount of time on that. And we're very positive. We think we begin to look at all the things we could do. We want to do a lot of good, solid scientific research and both facilitate that so people can lease space and resource on the Mir to do that. We also realized that the way to get publicity was to do space tourism. In other words, take people to the Mir. When the cosmonauts went up on a private mission, they did a Radio Shack commercial. I don't know if people remember what Radio Shack was. They took a talking picture frame up, and it was one of the cosmonauts' birthday. So we handed it to him, and he opened it up, and there was a picture of his daughter saying, "Hi, Daddy," in the talking picture frame. Apparently, it was a surprise to him that we had it, but that was Radio Shack's commercial for their talking picture frames. And it was a unique thing. We did a commercial activity on the Mir, perfectly nice thing that earned us a bit of money, and we saw doing more stuff like that. John Cameron, the guy who did Avatar and other, he wanted to do bring cameras, his 3D cameras onto the Mir and film, and we were talking to him. And then Dennis Tito, a fellow that ran a financial organization in Los Angeles, contacted us and said he would pay the amount of money we needed, which was around $12 million, to get to the Mir and be a tourist effectively on the Mir and experience space. So we signed him up. We have the contract with his signature on it. And that contract had a clause that if for some reason he couldn't go to the Mir, our Russian partners had agreed to take him to the ISS because Russia owned part of the ISS. They had their own door. They had their own compartment. So he had a backup plan, but we thought he was going to the Mir.
Interesting. It's smart to have the, contingency in the backup. All right. Your answer to my question of what were you thinking? You told me what you were doing.
Okay. What we were thinking I was thinking that this was the coolest thing, and that all my other activities in space, that this, I would consider this to be one of the most, it was reaching a lot of what I wanted to do, to create this private space program, a place where private organizations could work with us and contribute to what we're doing. And I looked at this, the O'Neill idea of resources from the moon. And I said, well, we can facilitate doing that from Mir. We can facilitate doing all these cool things that we wanted to do from Mir as our base. So we thought this was the beginning of a renaissance in space.
This is just the first step, and then from here you go. You're halfway. Anyway,
I was so excited to reach that first step, and we were getting support and cooperation from everybody. We thought,
and it's not PowerPoint. It is already on orbit. It's already there.
We had a space station. We had it was real, and we had good and bad. It's zero gravity. My ultimate desire for a space station is one that whirls around and gives you artificial gravity, but it was what we needed there. And actually, my goal was to immediately begin planning for a gravity space station to be built next to Mir, to begin the process of experimenting and building out the initial bones of that circulating station that would create artificial gravity near the Mir. So it was the path was set. We saw a great path to development of space for mankind.
And you've been putting time and resources in planting a whole bunch of things. And it's not just, broken ground. Like it seems to be growing, and nothing like building up just to now take the turn. What the hell happened? Well, why isn't MirCorp taking us there?
What happened was that the NASA really, really didn't like it. And there was an administrator there named Dan Golden, and he thought that we were somehow trying to steal resources, damage him. We were supportive of NASA's long-term goals, development of space. We even had a plan to move the Mir into an orbit that was nearby orbit to ISS, so that they would be close enough to each other that if either one had an emergency and had to be abandoned, that the cosmonauts and astronauts could move between with their the suits that had the thrusters, the minor thrusters on them. Yeah. So it would be a safety for both sides. We also were in the process of developing a electrostatic tether, but because of the magnetic field around Earth, if you put a copper wire up into the magnetic field and you put electricity into that wire from our solar panels, the wire would actually pull slightly against the Mir station, for example, and keep it in orbit without having to have constant booster rockets come up and boost it. Rather than making that a part of MirCorp, which would have made that intellectual property of MirCorp, we had a not-for-profit organization called the Foundation for the International Non-Governmental Development of Space.
Right.
And that organization funded this electrostatic tether, and we was scheduled to go up to the Mir to be tested. And if it had worked, we would have given that technology to NASA or let them take it so they could have saved booster cost on the ISS. We weren't anti-NASA. We were just wanted to do our own thing. Now, what happened?
So what NASA doesn't like it? Like, so what?
Yeah. So what happened, though, is the U.S. government at that time, Russia was really weak financially, and they were going through a lot of political changes. and they needed the support of the United States in a number of ways. So the NASA was able to twist the arm of the Russian space agency to order the deorbit of the Mir, to order the deorbit of an asset that we were leasing. And that actually is illegal under U.S. law. To interfere with a business in that way is a crime, and federal crime. But they didn't care. They did it. They convinced the Russian space agency to order the deorbit. It was ordered, and in April, I think it was April of 2000, the Mir entered the Pacific Ocean at a very high speed and ended our opportunity to create a private space program.
So you still had an active contract.
We still were the effective controllers of the legal entity that had legal control of the Mir at the time that it entered the Pacific Ocean. But the Russian space agency ignored our contract, and the U.S. government ignored their obligation not to interfere with private enterprise. They destroyed this asset before we could begin renovation, before we could raise the funds and do that. They destroyed the asset.
Maybe good that you hadn't already done all the work and then they destroyed. But but this is crazy. This is not commercial
piracy. It's piracy. It's a vicious, nasty, not invented here, small-minded piracy. And I began investigating. I knew who did. I knew who the culprits were, of course. I knew their names. But we wanted the smoking gun. We wanted the emails, the communication to prove it. Who damaged our business? Who destroyed the business? That triggered a response. The U.S. government has a lot more thugs who will be willing to follow orders than I did. I had no thugs. I just was doing an investigation. They had a bunch of thugs begin investigating me, and for 5 years, they did an investigation looking for something that they could do to me. And they didn't really find anything because they were finally went to the desperate measure of having to charge me with a tax fraud on a private, a not-for-profit charity called the Smaller World Foundation that I operated. It was a trust fund that contributed money to various causes, including space. And they claimed that I was the owner of it. And so all the profits it made in its investments belonged to me, and I hadn't paid taxes. Well, my view was that it was a not-for-profit organization. It was based outside the United States, and the U.S. government had no tax authority over that organization. But it didn't really matter whether the merit of their claims, the U.S. government claims, because they were the big empire. After 5 years and their desperation to find something, I was returning from the UK. I arrived on a Friday afternoon at Dulles Airport, and I was taken prisoner and was held the entire weekend without having access to my lawyer or anybody else, and arraigned on that Monday morning.
So in the span of a few minutes in the telling, you've gone from this space future is going to manifest to a chunk of metal in the ocean, and now you're, by trying to understand what happened, you're now in jail.
I'm in the basement of a building in DC, and my lawyer can't even meet with me for 48 hours.
And did you renounce space and all of these things then, or like what?
Of course not. Of course not. I'm the ultimate recidivist. I have gone right back to doing what I did before, building companies in telecom that are helpful and useful to the world. And I intend to go back when I can, when I have the resources, to continue to promote space by building more than a outpost, but a real space station.
How, like any normal person would have taken any number of those hits and said, yeah, okay, it's cool, but it's clear that that's not open. So what is it about you?
But here's the interesting thing, though, about what happened to me. It was such a dramatic thing, the way the government managed it. And we created a lot of publicity. We put a website up called Justice for Walt. So all the things the government said and did were publicly available. Every document they filed could be read by anybody. And it created a bit of embarrassment at NASA. A lot of the rank and file at NASA couldn't figure out what the hell their management was doing. I actually got an apology from a senior official there who was not one of the political appointees, but this person said, I'm really sorry what happened. I was there. I saw what they did to you. I wasn't involved, but I'm really sorry what happened because there was no reason for that. And this was a person who reported fairly directly to the administrator, Dan Golden, who was the person involved who created this mess.
And an apology is great. How the hell do you recover from that sort of... There's like 6 or 7 different things in here that any one of them could have been fatal to continuing. You still have this idea that, hey, space is a resource and this, commercial market is the answer. So
the future of the world didn't change just because I spent a few years being tortured by the U.S. government. And in fact, I was held in solitary confinement for 7 months before I finally agreed to confess to these silly tax charges.
That is another discussion. That's a longer...
I'm just going to say, and people doubt that I took me 3 years of Freedom of Information Act requests to get the proof that I was held in solitary confinement. I have it now. So if anybody wonders why I confessed to something I say I didn't do, I later went to the tax court while I was being held in a low security facility. They said I was the ultimate flight risk, that I couldn't be allowed to be out on bail.
You weren't going to escape to your space station because it was in the bottom of the ocean.
That's right.
Anyway.
I was the ultimate flight risk. But as soon as I confessed, I stopped being the ultimate flight risk, and I was sent to a facility with no walls, no security. I was given keys to a truck as part of my job there, where I could drive around, and so I became just bullshit. This whole thing. And I went to the tax court, and I proved the tax court conceded they used the word conceded, that I did not owe tax for the same exact, they didn't want to defend their position because they couldn't, but they could easily torture me into a confession because I wanted to see my family again before I died. Empires always have a certain percentage of thugs working for them, doing dirty work. Most large governments do. The U.S. government sicked their thugs on me, and that's what happened. Yeah.
So, Walt, this series of discussions is around the personal journeys of the people that created the world. You've obviously had an extraordinary personal journey. Why, after that, are you back? Are you still in it? When the Space Frontier Foundation was heading up to DC to talk to folks on Capitol Hill, you're the guy who said, hey, I want to be supportive. I want to host the happy hour. Thank you. After all this stuff, why are you still doing it?
Because I'm stubborn, and I was right. Space should be developed with a combination of government and private. There should be an open market in doing these things, peaceful development. The fact that a bunch of the Bush administration and his thugs damaged my life for a number of years, and actually I believe they put me in conditions where they hoped I would be killed or die. It didn't work. So screw them. And I'm going to keep doing what I did before. I'm building a telecom company now that I hope will be successful. It may not, but I'm going to give it a shot. And if it is successful, 2 of the other people working with me in the management team there are space crazy people like me. So we're all saying we're going to use the money we earn to build our space station eventually. The U.S. government owes me a space station, but I don't think they're going to pay it. So,
well, be careful. They might give you the ISS, and I don't know if you. See, no, not going to go down that path. When we talk about personal journeys, and someone who puts their money where their principles are, you're kind of right there at the top of the list. As you reflect, and I know we crammed a whole bunch of other things in there. What do you think about where the world is now? Like, through your efforts and through your experiences, has the marker moved forward? Are we closer to that future than?
I think so.
Okay.
After what happened to me, the Bush administration left power, the Obama administration came into power, and apparently his view was, as far as I know, what I've been told, is he said, I don't care. Private space sounds good. Let's get on to talk about something important. NASA administrators had changed a little bit. There'd been some pushback because of not only what they did to me, but what they did to other companies. And Space Frontier Foundation had continued their lobbying efforts that they'd done for 28 years and had some breakthroughs with NASA to create some private enterprise things and some private initiatives. I lost a battle in the war for private space, but the war is won. There is private space now. There is new space. Billions of dollars have been invested in various things. There are 150, like I say, launch companies now. Half of them won't succeed, but some of them are and will succeed. So there is a lot of what I hope to see come to pass has come to pass. I'd like to be involved in a lot of it, but I was out of commission for a few years. I've got to get back to where I can do that.
There's a lot of people that have put their lives, their energy of their life into helping bring about this space future. Many people, hitting a wall, but you're one of the ones where the wall hit your back. I can't thank you enough. Do you have any requests for people that are watching this? What's the next thing that you think that this industry, this community needs to be doing and taking the next step forward?
Well, all right. I'm a bit of a pacifist, so I would say let's continue the direction of peaceful development for the benefit of mankind, or commercial benefit. That's fine. Earth observation, satellite communication, whatever. Let's not let the military dominate space. Let's keep it a peaceful place for all mankind, all the people on Earth to benefit from. Work towards that goal, towards the use of space for mankind instead of as a military platform.
Amen. Walt Anderson, thank you very much, and look forward to hearing stories about the next chapters in your space adventure at some point soon.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview. Appreciate it.